Now this is the Hanna-Barbera comeback animation fans have been waiting for, including myself. In fact, there was a period in my childhood when I would frequently binge watch a variety of Hanna-Barbera shows, and Scooby-Doo was no exception. I remember often watching the original series and the many old spin-offs that tried to keep Scooby relevant throughout the 1970s and 80s. Yeah, they were formulaic, but they were still a lot of fun to watch. Considering how he is not only one of Hanna-Barbera's biggest stars, but also one of the most recognizable cartoon characters, it should be no surprise that he would lead the charge of a massive project down at Warner Animation Group. Not only do they want to bring Scooby and the gang back to the mainstream, but also create an entire Hanna-Barbera cinematic universe. Quite an ambitious task, but if they can pull it off, then I know the kid in me will be satisfied to see the Hanna-Barbera characters relevant again. So now that the Mystery Gang are back in a brand new way, will they solve the mystery of making a great film adaptation of a cartoon? Or could the film have been better if it weren't for those meddling kids and that mangy mud of theirs? Let's find out. The story. As it is a film based on Scooby-Doo, it does from time to time make some little homages to the original series. While not frequent, those moments do have their own little charm to show that it is trying to put some effort to make it feel like Scooby-Doo. In fact, one thing that animation fans will have fun with this is looking for the numerous of Easter eggs to other Hanna-Barbera shows, and I'm sure the animators had a lot of fun slipping in as many of those as possible. However, as fun as those nods and references are throughout the feature, there is something wrong with the movie that it cannot hide. When you take off that Hanna-Barbera mask, the film on its own is dreadfully bland and wouldn't take too long to be dated. The first major problem comes from the message, which is the power of friendship. I do understand why it would go in this direction so that it can supply the movie's heart and give emphasis on Shaggy and Scooby's relationship, but the way it presents it hurts the film more than it helps. The friendship aspect ends up feeling continuously forceful, like it keeps on hammering hard that the gang can only solve the mystery if they stick together.
I'd have to assume that if they were with their friends, they wouldn't have been kidnapped.
Okay, can you skip the emotional punishment?
It gets to a point where the emotional moments end up feeling more annoying due to how blatantly obvious of what it's trying to say, to the point that it almost feels like it's talking down to its audience. On top of that, it also makes the story painfully predictable. As it is mainly about Shaggy and Scooby, it almost fills out every cliche on the list of what happens in a generic buddy movie, while the rest of the gang are only there to deliver exposition to the big mystery they're trying to solve. And while this is already bad enough, the second problem makes it even worse with the tone. I thought studios have moved on from that phase, but this is still one of those that prioritizes to be modern and trendy for the younger crowd, where if you give it a few years, the movie will already be outdated. The biggest culprit of this is from the humor. And while not all of it is bad, since some of the visual gags and references are pretty funny, it's the jokes from the dialogue that fall flat by mainly being consisted of dull pop culture references. But what could possibly be the biggest shame of the movie is that the ideas it presents are great. Conceptually, it does have all the right materials to make an awesome Scooby-Doo movie that could lead to a massive Hanna-Barbera crossover. But its execution in the writing to be the typical trendy animated kids flick is what ruins all of its potential, leaving us with just another unengaging film based on a cartoon. The story could have been fun to solve a great mystery, but its lack of surprises turned this movie into a big disappointment. The animation. Considering that many of the homage and references to the series are visual-based, it is clear that it's in the animation where most of the appeal of the film is from. And with good reason, because the best thing to say about this movie is that the animation is really good. The most effort that was actually put into this film is to give the animation a crisp and clean look while also staying true to the style of the original series it's based on. Well, mostly anyways. I say that because the designs have some mixed results. There are a few, like Shaggy and Scooby, that stay true to their original look. Some have an understandably upgraded design to introduce a new version, like the Blue Falcon and Captain Caveman, and others have drastically changed from how they were before, like Fred and Dick Dastardly. On their own, their designs are fine and well done, but in the context of an adaptation of some Hanna-Barbera shows, it seems like a creative decision that doesn't make sense, and it makes the designs look inconsistent to one another. But I will say that's probably the biggest criticism I would have with the visuals. The rest of the elements are still a lot of fun to watch. Probably the biggest highlight of the feature is with the chasing and action scenes, which are also highlights of the show, so it does work out. Whenever Shaggy and Scooby try to get out of danger, or when the characters try to fight back, it does become a bit engaging not only by the intensity of the amount of danger that they find themselves in, but also the playfulness of the expressive character animation to add a bit more of that cartoony fun that also helps with the comedy. If anything, those are the moments that succeed the most in capturing the spirit of Scooby-Doo. But if there is one thing that goes without saying to really give credit to the animation, it's the large amount of details. On the characters, the textures help bring these familiar faces into computer animation, but they make sure to not add in too much to have it be overbearing and ruin the designs. For what's around the characters, like I said, part of the fun of this feature is finding the numerous amount of Hanna-Barbera references throughout, and some strong use of visual effects is also used in order to enhance the environment of the characters. There isn't a whole lot to say that's great about the movie, but at the very least, it did a nice job with the animation. The characters. Of course, the biggest reason to watch this film is to reunite with Scooby and the gang, to meet up with familiar faces, but also learn something new from them, as this is also a reboot. Unfortunately, it delivers very little from either, and what remains with the cast is just a bunch of generically forgettable characters wearing recognizable masks. Like I said before, with the main characters, Shaggy and Scooby-Doo, they're the typical main buddy duo that the film goes through their whole friendship from how they met, to the unavoidable conflict, to realizing that their bond is inseparable. Yes, they still act like the comedic cowards we all know and love, but those moments are rare in favor of making room for their tiresome friendship arc. The other members of Mystery Inc., like Fred, Daphne, and Velma, are meant to, again, explain the big mystery of why Dick Dastardly is trying to kidnap Scooby-Doo. It tries to give them a hint of a personality, like Fred is the dude that loves his car, Daphne is the princess-like caring sweetheart, and Velma is the nerdy brains, but their contribution to the feature is quite minimal outside of the exposition. Among the other Hanna-Barbera characters, there's Captain Caveman, who's just Tracy Morgan being Tracy Morgan, and the Blue Falcon, or should I say, his son, Brian. Among everyone here, the Blue Falcon got the biggest downgrade. Sure, he does have an arc to learn about how to properly be a superhero and facing pressure of filling in his dad's shoes, but the time spent with him is frustrating with how he always acts like the narcissist with imposter syndrome who cares more about his social media more than being a hero, while Dee Dee Sykes and Dynamite act as the adults that are focused on the mission.
Falcon! Hang on. Turn on the lights. Where are my balloons, Dee Dee? When I say Falcon Fury, that's supposed to cue the balloons.
But then there's the villain Dick Dastardly, the one who got the best update in the film. Despite having robotic minion ripoffs and kind of being the typical bad guy, there's also another side of him that kind of makes him endearing thanks to his backstory involving Muttley. Not to mention that he does supply some of the better jokes in the film. Now, there is something I would like to talk about that is a hot button subject about the film, especially within the animation and voiceover community, and that is the actors involved. Instead of bringing back the usual cast who voiced these characters, with the exception of Frank Welker, the film decided to hire big-name celebrities. I want to clarify that the actors themselves have done nothing wrong. Their performances are actually pretty good on their own. But it does leave a bad taste knowing that the voice actors who played these characters for decades have been thrown out and are openly heartbroken about it just because they're not popular enough for the marketing. Like, why even bring in Frank Welker to play as Scoob, but not as Fred? With the way it obviously values big names over experience, it gives the movie an additional bad taste of how it's obviously corporately manufactured than being an actual labor of love. Yes, the beloved characters are back, but definitely not as beloved as before. Before watching this, I thought to myself that, at the very least, it couldn't be as bad as either the live-action films or those recent direct-to-video movies. Now that I've seen it, though, that statement can honestly be debatable. Scoob is an entirely wasted potential similar to 2019's Addams Family that had a lot of great ideas and even some of the right materials to build up a great comeback to a beloved franchise, but it ended up becoming just another bland film that took an old property and tried to modernize it in an uninspiring way. While it may have a bit of substance from the enjoyable animation and strong concepts, all of that was ruined by the poor writing that was most likely caused by studio meddling that resulted in a terribly predictable story, forgettably generic characters, some really weak comedy, and a dated tone that turns this movie into a soulless corporately manufactured product. The only reason I'd recommend this is probably just for little kids to introduce them to Scooby-Doo in a way they'd most likely understand. As for fans of Scooby-Doo and Hanna-Barbera that are already familiar with these characters, it's honestly not really worth watching. Or if you are gonna watch it anyways, I highly recommend to set your expectations real low. If this is supposed to be the beginning of the Hanna-Barbera cinematic universe, then this is not off to a good start.
If you want, you can pull over and drop us off here.
We'll walk home.